In this episode, I interview the bishop of the ward that is the fastest growing and most baptizing in North America. Seriously, I had the people that would know tell me that, all right? Now, for those watching this, the actual video of this recording, you'll notice things look a little bit different. Well, I'm painting my office here at my home office where I do my typical recordings. So windows are open, blinds are not on the windows, sunlight's blaring through, my lighting's off, but you're not here to look at me. You are here to hear a remarkable interview with Devin Pope, the bishop in Southside Chicago, and his ideas, his approach to reaching out to the community. Over 1 million people live in his ward boundaries, and he has some unique approaches to creating community events. Listen to the details of how he goes about there, getting people just into the church. No proselyting zone in the church, but nonetheless stimulates growth and interest in the church. Also, the number of migrants that are coming into Chicago and how his ward has done a remarkable job reaching out to them, turning into so many baptisms. You're going to love it. This is one to pass around, to listen to twice, 3 times. So buckle up. Here we go. Get your notepad. We're getting into it. Here's my interview with Bishop Devin Pope in Southside Chicago. All right, Devin Pope, welcome to the Leading Saints podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, you are in the Chicago area. You teach at the University of Chicago, economics. That's pretty cool. Is it like your dream job?
It actually is. Yes, I'm super happy about it. It's been really fun.
Nice. So as you were going up through college and graduate school, was there a place that a school that you definitely wanted to teach at, or do you have a top 3 or?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I for some reason had this goal of being at Princeton someday, but they've never been that interested in me. And but yeah, I'm super happy to be here at Chicago, and I did a PhD at Berkeley. We loved it there as well, and so yeah.
Nice. And of course, you want to teach at BYU. Well, you have to just throw that in there, but maybe.
Yeah,
someday.
So I blew the question. Yes, BYU. I have a father and a brother who teach at BYU. So
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. Nice.
Yes.
Very good. Now, this is interesting how this call got set up. I work, I don't want people to read in this too much. It's not like I'm going out to lunch with Elder Bednar every Wednesday or something, but I work closely with the church as a Leading Saints nonprofit organization. We're an independent advocate of the church and, with many other organizations. So we're in touch with them, and they've helped us get some fantastic interviews. And one of my contacts there emailed me introducing me to you. And he said that you are the bishop in Chicago of the fastest growing and most baptizing ward in America. Now, listen, Devin, I don't care if that is legitimately real, but for the sake of this episode, and I'm a marketer, okay, so I need that tagline to move forward. But let's just assume that's true. But nonetheless, you would say that you are experiencing some level of success with the missionary program in your ward.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll just go with that.
Dwelling on the technicalities, then we can say yes.
Very good. So how long have you been bishop now?
It's been about 3 years.
Nice. Okay. And what is there a story to you being called, or just pretty typical?
Pretty typical. I was. It sounds like I think we'll talk mostly about missionary work and things today. I was called to be a ward mission leader and served in that position for 4 or 5 years prior to becoming bishop, and so spent a lot of time doing kind of missionary work here in the Hyde Park area, which is on the south side of Chicago, about 3 or 4 miles south of downtown.
Nice. So do some of these principles that we'll talk about today, did they start prior to your call as a bishop and as a ward missionary, sort of thinking through some of these things?
Yeah, I think most of it started as kind of being a ward mission leader.
Nice. And so, and we'll go through it, as we do in these How I Lead interviews. I had you send me a few principles that maybe we'll touch on more heavily than others. But is there a story behind this as far as, maybe we need to fill in some or create a foundation here of like, what's the area like? What's, the dynamics of your ward, the geographics of your ward? Maybe just set us up to launch into some of these principles.
Yeah, great question. So the Hyde Park ward, so it was just one ward at the Hyde Park ward. It's now been split into 2 different wards, but is right here in a neighborhood called Hyde Park on the south side of Chicago. The University of Chicago is here in Hyde Park as well, and so there are students and a couple of faculty members that are in the ward. But the ward takes up kind of the whole south side of Chicago. So there are slightly more than 1 million people in the ward boundaries. So think of it as kind of this massive area of a very dense population, a lot of low
Mhm.
income families, a lot of poverty and struggles here on the south side, but a really unique place. And then it's also got the university, and so it's kind of a perfect mix of a lot of families that could use the community and what the gospel can bring to their lives, but also a lot of students and other people that are passing through that have the ability to work and try to put some time into doing missionary work in the
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. So I was a bishop in Salt Lake in an inner city ward. That's how they classified it. And then part of that was very typical for an inner city ward to have really low youth counts, right? Would you say that's the case for your ward?
Yes, it was. I think we have actually a really large youth program, but almost all newer converts to the church right now. So,
Oh, okay.
um,
Nice.
yeah, we've got in the Hyde Park second ward right now, we have about 40 youth that are pretty active and doing well. And but yeah, they all kind of grew up here on the south side of Chicago.
Oh, cool. That's great. So maybe where does the story begin with some of these things? The principles you sent me are different approaches of missionary work, community events, and then retaining new converts and working with migrant families. So that's sort of the general scope of what I'll touch on. But I'd love to take this more of like a narrative. Where did this begin? What did you start trying? What worked? What didn't? Where does that take your mind?
Yeah, so when I was called as ward mission leader, I was thinking quite a bit about how I wanted to try um, to work in this calling, and I went back and kind of looked at kind of what we had done in terms of missionary work in our ward in the prior years. And I think, like a lot of wards, we had baptized a fair number of people, but very few of them were still active. So retention was a big problem, and almost all of the people we had baptized came from people the missionaries had met, either you know talking to people while they were out and about, or knocking on doors, or media referrals. And um, and it didn't feel like that type of missionary work that was happening was ever going to be very scalable in a way that we could have kind of sustainable growth. And so I read Clayton Christensen's book.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's like, okay, here's
The
a
power of
fellow,
everyday missionaries, right?
yeah, a fellow
So
business
good.
school professor. I read that, and uh, came away completely inspired. Loved everything. I mean, it's an amazing stories and an amazing book. And I was convinced that that was not at all, though, the approach that we should do on the south side of Chicago. Like I said, there's like 1 million people in our ward boundaries, and the idea that we should focus on the PhD colleagues of the few students in our ward rather than focus on the 1 million people here in our ward boundaries just seemed like, I mean, we should do that. We should, of course, do
Yeah,
member
sure.
missionary work, but it seemed like we were missing out on the entire community by doing that. And so it felt like we could try to be creative and do some things that tried to really bring in people, not just through the missionaries, not just through member friends, but by reaching out to the community. So that's when we started doing these community events.
Awesome. Awesome. So, and this was before you were the bishop, or
Yeah, this would have been back
okay,
back in like 2016 or 17.
okay. And so, what is as you approach this idea of community events, like what would a community event look like in Southside Chicago? Do you have a park you go to? Do you have a Bowery behind your church, or what?
Yeah, so we didn't really know, and so we started with a few different. We started, the first thing we did was we did a movie night. We bought a projector and a big screen, and we hung it up on the back of the church wall. We have a little lawn space, and we handed out flyers and tried to do whatever we could to get people out to a movie night and watched a Disney film for kids. So the focus was really on how do we get kids, families with kids, to our building. We felt like that was kind of the target audience. Um, and yeah, we did movie night, and we started getting a few people showing up, but it got pretty cold in Chicago after a couple of months. And so we started to think, well, what other kind of events could we do? And so we started running indoor carnivals inside the church, and we set up a miniature golf course and had people come and play. The church carpet ends up being a great miniature golf uh,
That's so true.
carpet.
I like that.
um, and we did an Easter event, and we did a Santa event where people could come and take free pictures with Santa. And Um, and I think there's two tricks. One is we were slowly trying to figure out what type of events people liked and would show up for, and also how to get the word out for the events. I think advertising was a big part of this, and so we were slowly kind of learning on both of those fronts.
Yeah. So was the intention, just especially in the beginning, like, did you just want to get people in the church, familiar with the church, or was there some type of, the missionaries were there, maybe chatting with people or anything like that?
Yeah, I love that question. So we called it a no proselytizing zone. So this
Ooh,
was
all
very
right.
important. Now I should mention my wife Linda should probably be doing this podcast more than me. She was super involved with all these events and was part of the innovation and inspiration for all of this. But yeah, so she and I would set up these events, and we'd have the missionaries come and help at the events, but we weren't going to bait and switch people. We weren't going to invite people to a carnival and have it be a Book of Mormon booth.
The old timeshare model, huh?
Exactly. So yeah, so the idea was, let's just start by getting people out, and then we would collect their contact information, and add them to a text blast list so that we could start to grow and we could invite them back for future events. But for the first 2 years or so, we took a very long view of this, where we just wanted to get people and welcome them and have them be part of what we were doing.
Nice. So you say 2 years. So this was 2 years prior to be called as bishop, or just lasted for 2 years? Or
Yeah, just so we've been doing it since 2016 or 17. So our next
oh, okay,
community event will be here in a few weeks. We're going to be doing a haunted house in the building,
nice.
which has become our most popular community
Really?
event. We had about 5,000 people the last 2 years come through our haunted house. So 5,000 last year and 5,000 the year before. We
Nice.
expect about that again this year.
Oh, that's fun.
Um, and so yeah, we've been kind of doing them throughout and have built kind of a large distribution list. We predict, or we estimate that about 25% of kids within a couple of miles of our church have been to one of our events at some point.
Wow.
So we're starting to get pretty good penetration into the city, and
Yeah.
when the missionaries walk around, people kind of know us. Yeah, they're the ones that run those events at their church.
Yeah. And then, so do you have a certain like cadence to it, that it's like a monthly event, a quarterly event, or?
Yeah, we did monthly for a long time, and then or almost monthly, and then when COVID hit, it made it hard to keep that up. And we continue to do like a haunted house in the parking lot where people pulled in their cars, and we'd put sheets over their cars and scare them and do different things. And
Yeah.
but we kind of slowed down, and then once we'd come back from COVID, we've been doing events about 4 to 6 times a year.
Okay. Okay. So it works out about quarterly, maybe a little bit more. So
Yeah.
that's great. And would you recommend, I mean, starting out, do you kind of need to maybe do it monthly? I mean, would you recommend that to others who are maybe considering this, or just, is that a sweet spot?
Yeah, my guess is monthly is too much.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to sustain that level of intensity. But if someone was wanting to start out, and I could share Google Forms and signups and everything,
Oh yeah,
and
please do.
things if anyone wanted that. But I'd recommend, for example, doing a Santa event. Super easy. You
Hmm.
bring people in, have them, give them a treat, let them do some crafts, give them a number to meet with Santa. You have a bunch of Santas in different rooms around the building if you have big turnout, and the kids get to go do a free picture with Santa. If you're in an area like ours and it's expensive to go take a picture with Santa, and a lot of these
Yeah.
families don't have the money to kind of go do that, then they just feel really grateful to come to a free, safe event.
Yeah. No, that's great. And this is good, just general recommendation. My first year as bishop, I made an executive decision not to do Santa at the Christmas party. And let's just say I heard about it. So didn't make that mistake again. Because people are like, yeah, I don't want to go to a mall and pay and stand in a long line. Like, help me out, bishop, right?
Don't mess with Santa.
But I love that as a community event, because every home, Christian home at least, is dealing with that. So that's really good. I'm curious, going back to this, now that's upon you, this haunted house event. I imagine you don't have maybe, Friday the 13th masks with chainsaws running around. But I mean, how do you handle the haunted house event?
Yeah, so it's a haunted house for kids, but we make it very clear that it's scary, and
Good.
we have two of the best fake chainsaws on the market.
Oh, nice.
That
Love it.
are included. So I mean, we try to make it fun, but not too crazy.
Right. Yeah.
I'll tell you, if we're having this be a narrative, I'll tell you a little story about the haunted house. The first one we did
Please.
was 8 years ago, so this will be our 8th annual haunted house this year. But it was the first time we had tried it. We thought, okay, maybe this is something that people will like, and so we said we had one night set aside to do this haunted house, and we came and kind of set up the whole building and got it all ready so people could walk around and go in and out of the classrooms and everything. Um, and I remember, so I think we had scheduled the event. People were invited to come at like 7 o'clock or something, and it was going to run from 7 to 9. And um, I at about 6:45 or something, I was doing kind of a final walk around the building to make sure all the missionaries were in their place and ready to go and everything. And the doors had been shut. But then when I came back to the front, someone had opened the doors. And as I walked to the front, people were just streaming into the building. So they were all going to the gym, which was where our waiting area was. And I poked my head in the gym, and the gym was like standing room only. It was
Oh,
packed.
wow.
So
Hopefully
we
there
had
wasn't a
no
fire
idea.
marshal there.
Yeah, we had no idea the level of interest that this haunted house would actually create. So we had like an hour-long wait before we even started, and so we had to kind of. Anyway, it was very clear. And so more recently, we do 6 different nights for 3 hours each night in order to get everyone through that wants to. And but yeah, so it's a super fun one.
Wow, that's awesome. Um, any other you mentioned the Santa event, the haunted house event, and I love the haunted house because I assume maybe you're in a typical Latter-day Saint chapel or building, but it really is set up for kind of a sweet, haunted house experience with all those rooms lined up around the
Yeah.
building, one to the next. But any other like events that have been really popular that you make sure you keep doing year after year?
Yeah, I mean our Easter event, we do several rounds of Easter egg hunts so that we can get everyone through, and that's always popular. We do a carnival that's been super popular, and then sometimes we bring in some. If you want to run a super easy event, like hire a magician for $300 or $400, have them come in and do a big show, and just invite the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of one of these things where someone has to kind of organize it and do it, and but you can just do it. We set up chairs in the back lawn, pass out popsicles or otter pops, and
Yeah.
let people see a magic show for an hour. And
Yeah.
the
That's
neighbors
awesome.
are pretty excited.
Does your chapel have a stage in it, like some of the older traditional ones?
It does, yeah.
Okay, well that's nice. That's nice. I think we should look for more ways like this to use the stage. Back in the day of road shows and things, I think we
Oh
used a
yeah,
lot
yeah, for
more.
sure,
But things seems now it's more of a liability as kids run around up there after church or whatnot.
for sure.
So yeah, that's great. Any other activities you recommend, or those are sort of the big ones?
I think those are kind of the core ones that we've settled on. I
Yeah.
mean, we had a bunch that were total flops too. I in fact, I'm cautious in this podcast to be like, we certainly don't have it all figured out, and there were certainly
Yeah.
a lot of wrong turns along the way. I mean, I had this one activity I was so excited about where we were going to stack Dixie cups on top of each other and build castles of paper
Uh-huh.
cups. And then my vision was just like all around the church, people were stacking cups, and eventually they all formed one huge, castle structure, and no one showed up. People didn't quite understand my vision of Dixie cup castles, and we just ended up with tens of thousands of Dixie cups left over that never got used.
Oh man. Well, I appreciate you sharing. A fail there. It makes it real for sure. You mentioned like missionaries helping. I assume are you referring to the full time missionaries and maybe just like what do the dynamics look like of just like the human resources that are involved? Right. You got the full time missionaries. You have an activities committee involved. I mean, how does all that work?
Yeah, so we have a lot of missionaries in our area. So the Hyde Park Second Ward right now, I think, has 18 full-time missionaries in it. And then the Hyde Park First Ward has a bunch of missionaries as well. And so when we do an event, we ask them all to help out. If we need more missionaries, we can work with the mission president to try to bring a few missionaries from across the zone or from other wards nearby. But yeah, we ask them to be involved, and again, not proselytize, but my impression is that as a missionary, as a full-time missionary, spending 3 hours, helping a kid, sit on Santa's lap and give them a treat, and is both fun, and it's incredible branding for our church in terms of, yeah, our missionaries are out there trying to help families have a good time.
Yeah.
Um, And so if they're sitting at a carnival teaching kids how to shoot a bow and arrow or a slingshot or whatever it is that they're doing at the carnival, I think that's time well spent.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have, how does it work as far as members of your ward helping?
Yeah, so we certainly try to bring, so the youth programs, or all the young men and the young women will come help at the haunted house, for example. They are all each given a night where they come and they take part in it. And so, yeah, it's great to get the youth involved. And then several adults have been super helpful and consistent helpers throughout the years too.
Awesome. Very good. So I assume everything's free, obviously, to attend.
For sure.
Do you, you know, there's no, I'm just thinking like budget or do you look at this as a fundraising effort or anything? But with your typical ward budget, you're able to do these things without much of an issue.
Yeah, not quite. I mean, war budgets are not huge.
Right.
But if you have kind of a couple of local people that are willing to kind of chip in a bit,
Gotcha.
you
Okay.
can usually figure it out. And some activities are pretty cheap. So, like, again, if I were going to try to do one of these from first off, all you have to do is order a couple of $70 Santa suits off of Amazon and some treats and some dollar crafts from Michael's or something, and for a few $100s, you've got a pretty nice community event.
Yeah. Awesome. Anything else as far as the community events that we should mention before we move on?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's a different way of thinking about missionary work and reaching out to a broader group of people rather than kind of the missionaries find one person. We work really, really, really hard to get them excited about our church. Let's reach out to thousands of families and see who shows up to church the next Sunday. And it seems like they're looking for a community to be a part of. And then we don't have to sell people quite so hard, and we find people that are super excited.
Yeah, for sure. And those people are typically easier to retain as well, right? Which we'll get to.
100%.
So like you said, these community events, there are no proselytizing zones. So you're not actively or even subtly, proselytizing to them. But I mean, organically, how does that work? Do you see people just show up on Sunday because they've been familiar with the church or the church building, or anything come to mind?
Yeah, what a great question. So, yeah, we've kind of slowly changed a little bit over time on this. So originally, for the first couple of years, it was just, we never said anything about it. Like, if they came to us and begged us to come to church, we would tell them the hours. But but we were very hands off, and I was really worried about kind of, again, a bait and switch type of idea. More recently, we've had people sign up for the events in advance, so we just become so large that we have to kind of organize a bit better, and people have to sign up in order to come, so we can spread people out across different hours of the events and things. And so we've moved to a situation where when they sign up, we have a little box that they can check that says, are you looking for a church home? Which is the way that people here in Chicago talk about, a lot of people say, I already have a church home. And so we'll say, are you looking for a church home? And would you like us to reach out to you with more information about our church? And if they check that box, then we do, we've at times had missionaries reach out to them. At times we've just invited them to church. At times we've invited them to a pizza and information night with the pastor, and to just get more information. And so we've tried different ways of kind of reaching out to those people who have expressed interest. And a lot of people do. So when we do our haunted house here in a month, we'll have something like, we'll have about 800 to 1,000 families that express interest in our church. And we'll work on reaching out to them.
Awesome. And so I'm curious, these pizza introduction and pizza nights, is this something you do regularly, or you just tried it here and there? Or
yeah, we just tried all sorts of things as a way to try to get these people who are at least somewhat interested to learn a little bit more in a very non-committal and an easy way. And sometimes showing up and letting your kids eat pizza while you chat about some of your concerns about this new church you're considering attending is a good way to go.
Yeah, I like that. I've had this thought generally of, with just reflecting my own mission, or, you kind of get, as a missionary, you meet this family and they're great, or you meet this guy who loves to talk about the Bible, or, you go back and forth, and remember going back to these places thinking, yeah, if I just have the right 5 scriptures, I can show him and kind of push him this way and that way. Like then he'll get it and then he'll attend. Right. And you get you hyper focus on these people who at the end of the day, they're not that interested. Right. But if we create a way where we can really filter out those people who are like, you know what, I just had, my dad just died and I'm really reflecting on eternal questions. And I mean, those are the type of people we want to talk to. And that way it doesn't have to be a hard push. You can just be like, this is what we have to offer. We have some answers. We have some doctrine. We have some theology that may intrigue you and maybe check us out. Right. And that there's no like this hard sales feeling to it.
Yeah, man, I love that. I think if there's one thing that I've slowly been learning over the last several years is that there are multiple ways to gain a testimony of our church, our communities that we run, and it doesn't have to be a scriptural testimony. You can gain a testimony of a place because you feel comfortable and loved and a sense of community, and that's a totally fine testimony.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable with people coming to us for those reasons.
Powerful. Oh, I was going to ask, like, how many missionary companionships do you have assigned to your ward?
Yeah, so right now I think we have, I think it's 18 full-time missionaries in.
What?
I
18?
know, we're super
Holy
lucky,
cow.
and
Hey, you deserve it. You deserve every single one of those.
I mean
That's
that
great.
includes 2 senior couples that are amazing, and then just a
Yeah.
bunch of younger missionaries, and
Yeah.
so yeah, it's great.
But like you said, 1 million people in your ward boundaries, right? So it's not like, some farm town that, So yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, like, wow, that's probably pretty cool on Sundays to see that many name tags
Yeah, it
wandering
is
around. So that's
for
cool.
sure.
Very cool. All right. Should we move on to the second point here as far as retaining new converts?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned off the top that retention is a super hard thing, right? And so for me, my thoughts, and again, I'm not an expert at this, or
Yeah.
I
We get it.
hesitate to I feel like I'm on a soapbox this whole time or whatever. But um, my thought was, okay, the first thing we need to focus on is finding some really good families who are actually interested, that we're not pressuring into this thing, but actually want to be here. But then very quickly, once families start coming in, you pivot a little bit and start thinking about, okay, well, how do we make this a place where they actually feel welcome and they want to be? And I think that's super important. A lot of people show up to our church, and just don't really like it. It's different than what they're used to, and some people will never show up again because of that, and that's fine. We're never going to be able to please everyone in terms of what they're looking for in a church, and that's fine. But I think there are some like little easy things that we can do to make it better.
Yeah. Let's start with the first one. What comes to mind?
So one is, I think we need to do a little bit better job in our sacrament meetings. I remember the week we came back, the first time my family came back from COVID, and we sat through sacrament meeting. I remember my oldest son on the way home said, "Oh, I forgot how boring church is." And I was a little bit saddened, and I was like, "Yeah." So I'm not suggesting we need to bring in our electric guitars or different things necessarily. And we have a
Right.
certain style and format that our church is, and I respect that, and I actually really appreciate the level of reverence and things in our meetings. But I think there are some small things that one could do better. So, for example, I think most members of our church are not very good at giving a 15-minute talk. We're just not natural preachers. And if sacrament meeting is always, a youth talk followed by 2 15-minute talks, a lot of Sundays are going to be pretty tough to get through. And again, still worth going. I'm a fan, but I think we can do a little bit better. And so, for example, one of the things we've tried to do in our ward is just have lots of different types of meeting formats. So we're recording this on a Monday. Yesterday, I had a couple, husband and wife, get up and they shared about 2 competing views in the scriptures. One about how we should let our light shine when we do good works so that people can see our good works, and the other that we shouldn't let our left hand know what our right hand doeth. And try to kind of together up at the pulpit come to an explanation of how these 2 seemingly inconsistent scripture verses in the same sermon could be reconciled. And having just two people up at the pulpit at the same time just gives a different flavor to the meeting. The week before, we had 8 people talk about the Beatitudes for 2 minutes each. There are 8 Beatitudes, and each one took a Beatitude, and they had to stay within 2 minutes. And so having lots of little talks can be a fun way to do it. Next week, our plan is we're going to have a child memorize a scripture, and they're going to read this. They're going to go up and memorize and recite the scripture, and then have their parents share a little bit about what that scripture means to them. Anyway, those are just ideas of, like, I think every meeting one should be thoughtful about the program and come up with ways to make it a little bit different and something that just works better for what we do.
Yeah, I love that. And really, as far as retention goes, sort of regrouping around some of these traditions, because a lot of us have been doing it so long, we think, well, I think we're just supposed to do it this way, even though it's a little boring. We're just supposed to do it this way, right? And we'll link to this episode, but a few months ago, I interviewed Ryan Webb, and the episode's called Rallying the Ward Around Sacrament Meeting. And he gives, we spent a good 45, 50 minutes on just this topic. So if people want more ideas or inspiration, I'll point them that way as well. So really good stuff. And then as far as providing value, anything else as far as with those retaining people through providing value that comes to mind?
Yeah. So I'll give my most important thing. I think if we want people to come and worship with us and remain with us, we have to look for ways to change their lives in a meaningful way. So if a lot of the people that have joined our ward are single moms with some kids, and I think they typically share a few features. They typically love their kids, right? They brought them to a free event or whatever the case may be, but they're also tired and exhausted and worn out and looking for some help sometimes. And so I think if we just ask them to add 10 hours of meetings to their week without providing some relief in some way, I think we're asking too much. And so how do you change someone's life in a meaningful way? I think in our ward, there's basically 4 main things. One is helping them with better housing. Sometimes they just need a cosigner, or they need help with a security deposit or something to get into a safer, more comfortable space for their family. Sometimes it's jobs. They need either training or just help finding a better job. Oftentimes it's their kids' schooling or something with their kids that needs a big change. Or lastly, I think a lot of people are struggling trying to navigate the immigration process, and they could use some help with that. So for us, I think it's usually one of those 4 things. And if we can make a difference and actually change their lives, then they tend to they feel God's love, and it's a reason to stay.
Yeah, that's so powerful, that just stepping back and saying, how can we make this experience, this church, this community really transformational? And, on paper, it is transformational. You think of the power of the covenants, the power of ordinances, and the restored authority. I mean, so it's all there, right? We got the tools, but like to really step back and say, how can we take that to the next level so that they really feel that, and they'd have to come back, even if they couldn't for some reason, like they just want it so bad. I think that's worth exploring and sort of putting into the revelation machine and for your local area, and seeing what comes out. Right. So
love it.
Tell me about just like you mentioned, a little bit of welfare focus. I think is obviously in the inner city, Southside Chicago, there's probably some welfare needs, right? Anything else that's worth saying there? Because there's that dynamic of, I remember being that bishop in a high welfare area, and, word gets around, to go to this church and yes, this and that, and you get this and that. And anything else, and that's maybe its own episode of itself, but anything else you would add to just how to make that function in an effective way?
Yeah, I mean, again, and so this is for sure something I'm not the authority to tell people how to do their welfare,
right.
but I do feel pretty strongly, at least in my local area, for where I do have some say in how it works, that we need to look for ways to be super generous, although, realizing that the funds are sacred and we need to be super careful as well. But I think the one maybe difference in the way that I've been thinking about welfare, and with the support of a stake president and other people and an elders quorum president, a release site president who are doing a lot of that work, is thinking a little bit more long term. So rather than just trying to put out fires, it's thinking about how do you invest in a family that, has a welfare plan, but their path to self-sufficiency might be 4 or 5 years out, not next month. And sometimes it's, well, they need to learn English and then they need to do pathways and then they're going to get a better job. But you have to realize that's like a 4 or 5 year process. And it's okay, I think, to commit to a family for that long, as long as they're doing their part and they're working on things and fulfilling their part of that welfare plan. Look, seeing the really big picture and thinking long term in some of these plans is important when you have a family identified that is worth that effort and time.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And do you have I had 4 sets of welfare type of missionaries. Do you have anything like that in your ward?
No, most of the work's done in our Elders Quorum and Relief Society.
Okay, cool.
But the missionaries, especially the senior missionaries, do help out with certain needs at times. Yeah, cool. But no one that's set aside for that specific task.
Awesome. And are these senior missionaries, are they from outside of Illinois, or?
They are, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, just leader support.
Gotcha.
Missionaries.
Awesome. Anything else about, as far as going back to retaining new converts, and you're just sort of, you've articulated it well, just sort of not, not laying it on too thick with just being a Latter-day Saint, right? We are working, busy people, and sometimes we get carried away with that, in my opinion. And sometimes there can be feeling when you go to church of like, I come here, I'm just exhausted from my week, and now I feel like there's more marching orders that I have, or, I feel like I got to spend more time ministering, or I got to do more of my calling, or I'm not doing come follow me enough, right? And people can leave church with this really heavy feeling, and when in reality, church should be redemptive. You should feel lighter when you walk out, like, oh, I'm glad I went there today, right? So anything else as far as sort of relaxing on just the experience in general that comes to mind?
Yeah, I love how you frame that question. And so I think relax is the exact right word. I think there's a fine line between trying to enforce a level of reverence and certain social norms that we try to do in our church, and just letting people be themselves a bit. So I'll give a couple of examples. And if you come to our ward, you're going to hear clapping. And it just happens.
Whoa. Okay.
I know.
This is a moment here. Okay. Tell me more.
Well, I mean, if you have, half the people in the room are super recent converts, you have to basically, and you have, 30 people in the room who are visiting that day, you either have to announce, we don't clap every single
awkward,
Sunday.
Right?
Yep. It's like, welcome to our meeting. Let me tell you all of our rules.
Yeah.
Or you just kind of let things go a bit. And if there's some clapping, then maybe if it's like starting to get a little out of hand, then you announce it once in a while, and then it like subsides for a while, and then it starts to build up again. And I don't know. That's like kind of weird example, and
that's a good one though. That's great. Yeah.
But you have to be comfortable with people letting super new members come up and give talks and give prayers, and they're going to do it in a way that's not orthodox. And rather than immediately go up and explain to them how we say a prayer, you just say amen and be grateful for their efforts and their contribution.
Yeah.
And one could go on and on about clothing and other things, but when I read the New Testament, one of the number one things that seems like Jesus is trying to point to is that, hey, let's not get so carried away in all of our little rules and let's focus on mercy.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And that is, I think we just, again, now that we're like promoting, like we recommend every ward in the world start clapping.
Yeah,
of course
for
not.
Sure.
We're not doing it. But at the same time, like I've thought about this a lot, that there's just these little nuances, like being raised in the church is just part of our culture and we just don't even think about it. But like when someone joins the church, like you think about the dynamic of, say, family home evening, right? Now, I don't know. I think it might still be in the handbook, but obviously we've sort of, especially with Come Follow Me, we've sort of grown away from this Monday night is the night. But I mean, who teaches them that, right? Like, who sits them down and says, okay, let me tell you what family home evening is and that you should do this, or let me tell you what ministering is. Like, you're going to be assigned these families, you got to do this, or let me tell you how to dress up to church, right? And even if we did that, right, even if we were proactive, being like, we need an orientation meeting for all converts, and it's like, I don't know, like, what am I joining here? Like, there's so many rules and dynamics, like, where we can, invite people to come and see, come as you are, and you're part of us, and you'll figure these things out as you go. But for now, like, we're good with whatever you understand or however you want to contribute in the meeting, right?
100%.
Yeah.
If we're expecting a new member family to look like a born and raised in the church family within a few months, then we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah.
And we're also setting ourselves up for something that's not going to be great. We
Right.
want people's different backgrounds. We want to learn from others in the way that they grew up and worshiped. And so, yeah, we should welcome their differences, for sure.
Awesome. Great. All right. Last segment here. Talk to me about just like migrant families. Obviously, in Southside Chicago, there's it's a melting pot of different cultures and different backgrounds and ethnicities and cultures. So, I mean, where do we start there?
Yeah. So this is one of the things I'm most excited about right now is, so if you've been kind of following the news, there's a large migrant population that has been coming mostly from Venezuela, but also Colombia and Ecuador, and many of these migrants have been bused to New York City and Denver and here to Chicago. So we have about 50,000 migrants that have come from those countries to Chicago over the last 2 years. And they're often put in temporary housing facilities in the city, and I want to be careful here because I know there's a lot of politics associated with immigrants and things, and again, I think we can largely set that aside, and I think it's very clear. So you can have your own view of how we should police the border or whatever that is.
Yeah, and you can go vote, and we encourage you to vote and do all those things. But today, this week, they're in your town, right? What are you going to do? Right?
That's right, and I think it's very clear that Jesus said, "They're your neighbors." And we know what we're supposed to do to our neighbors, and so our ward, we have these new neighbors in these temporary housing facility, in one large temporary housing facility near our ward, and we, at the end of 2023, so about 9 months ago, we were thinking about, well, how do we be good neighbors to these wards? And some other local churches were leading the way. I'm so grateful for their examples of providing food and help to these migrant families. And so we talked as a ward council, and then we did kind of a fifth Sunday ward lesson with everyone involved, and decided that we wanted to start doing a lunch at our ward building on Saturdays. And we'd do it for 3 hours every Saturday and just invite these families to come over. The temporary housing facility, this one particular one near our ward building, is pretty rough place. They're often sharing multiple families in one room, and the food is not great, and they've got little kids. And so our building can be a place where their kids can run a little bit, have a more authentic South American cuisine lunch, and talk and relax, and we can get to know them and hear their stories, and express our willingness to try to help them in ways. And so that's what we tried. We opened up our building, and slowly people started coming, and we started up a distribution, a WhatsApp group, and where we make announcements and let people. And again, it was a no proselytizing zone. We weren't going to invite people for a lunch and then drill them with religion.
Yeah.
And it's been an amazing thing. So we've been continuing to do this. Our last lunch just this last Saturday had, I don't know how many people, but over 100 of family, or 100 people there eating lunch and enjoying it, and kids running around and having a good time. And It's been a real beautiful thing.
And did you say it's monthly that you do that?
It's weekly. We do it every Saturday.
Oh, weekly, every Saturday. Yeah. Great. Wow. And I mean, pretty cut and dry as far as, I mean, this does not take a lot of effort other than the food, right? You're putting up some tables and chairs and opening the doors type of thing, right?
Yep. We've been using some of our community event props. We've got like a big bounce house and a few other things. So we always set those things up, and so the kids can kind of play. And but yeah, it's not a huge lift, but it ends up being kind of a special thing.
Yeah. So I feel I have to ask these questions or else I'll get a million emails and that I have to forward on to you. But so where does the budget come for that food?
Local donations to start, and then our church has the welfare rep for our area has graciously helped us with a grant to provide money for the food as well. So
yeah,
super huge thanks to our church.
I think that's one thing. Again, maybe people at the church are like, "Don't say it, Kurt," but the point being is, like, it's amazing. You make some phone calls, and you can't just say, "Well, we don't have the budget. I guess we won't do it." But make some phone calls. Reach out to your area authorities. We got welfare. Can you use fast offering funds? I mean, we got bishop storehouses. Like, again, just ask the question. In the worst case, they just say, "Sorry, we can't help you," and great, you'll figure something else out. But make some phone calls, right? So
yes,
awesome. And then the same type of dynamic, obviously no proselytizing zone, but people become familiar with the church. And, obviously a lot of Spanish speaking families that show up there, which I'm sure the Spanish speaking missionaries may end up getting to know at some point, but anything else as far as that, as the migrant effort, and that would be worth mentioning.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. So while we started as like kind of a no proselytizing zone, these families, a lot of these families come, these countries are usually Christian countries. They're coming from a Christian background, and a large fraction of these families at the lunches will say, well, do you have services too? And are you welcome to people coming to the services? And so we've started to be just kind of open about that. And we just list our services and let people know that they are welcome. And a lot of people come. So I think yesterday we had between 200 and 250 Spanish-speaking people in our sacrament meeting. We do headset translations for sacrament meeting, and then we have separate Spanish-speaking elders quorums and relief societies and primary and youth groups and everything, Sunday school classes, and it's been an incredibly cool thing to add this large group of people to our ward, and they're just amazing.
Wow, that's awesome. Really inspiring, especially as my heart just bleeds for that, because I was a Spanish speaking missionary in Sacramento, California. And so, man, I loved working with those people, and, being sort of a representative, not only of Jesus Christ and the church, but of the United States, and, being an American, engaging with them and loving them and things. So I love that. Very good. Very good. Anything else about that we haven't mentioned, or do we kind of sum it up?
I think that's about right. I will just say maybe that adding 250 new people to a ward is hard, and right. it creates its own challenges, and even just trying to do temple trips and thinking about all of these families here in 6 more months when they're going to want to go through the temple and be sealed and things is an enormous amount of production that has to take place at the ward level to try to make sure to take care of all these families. So I'll put in a plug. If anyone speaks Spanish and wants to come join a unit, reach out to me. It can be cool. Unofficial, or we can go through the missionary department. But we need people that are willing to come and work with new members. It's a huge lift.
Wow. Yeah, that was where I was going next. Is obviously you said was it 18 companionships or 18 missionaries?
18 missionaries.
Okay, so you have 18 missionaries, and then I was just going to ask, like, as far as numbers. So you said 250. Is that in the past year?
I mean, these 250 Spanish speakers are all. We didn't have any Spanish speakers in December of last year, so in the last 9 months.
Oh wow.
A lot of these are kids too. Our primary yesterday had about 80 Spanish speaking kids in it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Is there a Spanish speaking unit in your area? I would imagine there is, right?
There is, but not close enough that most of these families can get to. And so,
gotcha.
And
Yeah.
so our ward building is kind of the spot to still come. And as of right now, we're just trying to do translation and trying to figure out some things going forward a bit.
Yeah. So you got, I mean, there's headsets out in the audience in sacrament meeting, things like that happening.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, and we have, half of our talks are Spanish, and uh, you know either our opening or closing prayer will be in Spanish, and we'll sometimes encourage everyone to sing a Spanish hymn together, and we'll try to do things to make sure that everyone's feeling welcome. But it
Yeah.
can add a lot of extra work when we don't have a lot of bilingual speakers in the ward.
Wow. I'm about to pack my bag, so I want you to know that. But we'll
Oh, we take you.
no, that'd be so fun. Um, and anything else that I'm just thinking, being a highly baptizing ward in North America, I mean, what a good problem to have, but it kind of creates its own problems, like additional problems, like you mentioned. But these are good problems, and they're worth figuring out. Um, is there like on Saturdays? Is there usually baptisms happening then? I mean, there's always baptism. How do you handle just the baptism service load?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you're hitting on some of the so there are baptisms basically every Saturday. Um, we've had to adjust some things. So something as simple as, confirmations would take most of sacrament meeting for week after week after week. And so there have been some recent handbook changes that allow us more flexibility in terms of doing confirmations at the baptismal service itself. And that kind of frees up Sunday sacrament program time a bit, which is nice. And so, yeah, you have to figure out a lot. And then, uh, you have to figure out how do you do 40 Aaronic priesthood interviews over a period of 3 months? And so, yeah, there's a lot of logistical challenges that can come with all of this, but all solvable, I think, with
Yeah,
people that are willing to pitch in. And kudos to so many great members of our ward who have done so and made the efforts to welcome everyone.
right. What's your typical sacrament meeting attendance?
Uh, Yesterday it was 396.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay.
but that's the most we've ever had. So it's been just kind of growing and growing.
Yeah.
It was only 150 9 months ago.
Yeah. And this the things of, you think, well, the church, obviously the church needs to go there and create a Spanish unit and maybe split the ward and all things, but there's so many technicalities to that of like, where would they meet? Do we have enough buildings, right? Like there's just so many things that church has to consider, and the application process and boundaries and things like that, it unfortunately doesn't move as quickly as maybe you need it, but so you have to figure things out while you go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, kudos to our church. Our church is really impressive in terms of
Yeah.
its efficiency and organization and things. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't be more proud of a lot of the
Yeah.
efforts that our church makes on that front.
Wow. Well, Devin, this was a fun interview. I'm so inspired and to hear this, and I'm excited to share it. Any other point, principle, story before I ask my last question, or anything else come to mind you want to make sure we include on this episode?
Can I share one final quote from Elder Uchtdorf that has been my go-to? Is that all right?
Yeah, please.
So if you ask about, how one of the other things that can be hard about adding a lot of new members, especially when there are welfare needs involved, it can be tricky to wonder, oh, well, are people actually being sincere, or are some people kind of trying to play the system somehow? And I think it's really hard, and something that we've struggled with as local leaders, that I think we're trying really hard to be careful, but one has to think about. And and by the way, I'm convinced that that's not what is happening here at all. The testimonies of these individuals are so real. But can I read this Elder Uchtdorf quote that has
Yeah,
been my mantra?
please.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this, and most of your listeners have as well. But he said, when I was a young boy during the aftermath of World War II, Germany was broken and in ruins. Many people were hungry, sick, and dying. I remember well the humanitarian shipments of food and clothing that came from the church in Salt Lake City. To this day, I can still remember the smell of the clothing, and I can still taste the sweetness of the canned peaches. So I love that. Elder Uchtdorf tasted some of this welfare food that
Yeah.
he needed, right? And then he goes on to say, he says, there were some who joined the church because of the goods that they received at that time. Some members looked down on these new converts. They even called them an offensive name, Buchenmornsen, or canned food Mormons. They resented these new members because they believed that once their temporal needs had been met, they would fall away. While some did leave, Many stayed. They came to church, tasted the sweetness of the gospel, and felt the tender embrace of caring brothers and sisters. They discovered home, and now 3 and 4 generations later, many families trace their church membership back to these converts.
Wow.
Is it true that some of these individuals that are worshiping with us, if we stop our free lunches on Saturdays, will maybe start to disappear a little bit? Maybe some. But is it absolutely true that so many of them have become converted? And again, a conversion through feeling love and feeling welcomed. A lot of them will talk about this is like one of the few places they felt welcomed in months. And that's a fine way to gain a testimony of Jesus Christ and a church that's trying to kind of live by some of those principles. So I'm comfortable with that being their first taste of our church and some of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you, Bishop Pope. I mean, what a fantastic name you have there. Is Bishop Pope. It helps those Catholic converts a little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
But let's keep in touch. I'd love to hear just how things progress, what you're learning. And I think many of us, as a community, we want to be a community of Zion where we come together, we hear what other people are doing and what's working and learning from each other's perspectives. So this has been really a treat to chat with you. And I got to put this on my list. I'm going to come visit. So if I'll come shake your hand amongst the masses if I show up to church on one of these Sundays. So last question I have for you, Devin, is as you reflect on your time as a leader, how has being a leader helped you become a better follower of Jesus Christ?
Yeah. I think being a leader forces you to interact with people who are different from you. And I think the more any of us do that, the more we can interact with people who are different from us, the more we'll learn how to be a better person ourselves. Charity seeketh not her own. We're supposed to, it's easy to help those that are like us. We're supposed to seek out people who are different from us. And so for me, being a leader has kind of forced me to do that in a way that's been really beneficial for me.